I've never been a fan of crowds, especially around Christmas time when you're doing the Christmas shopping. You know, being herded in all directions, and if you go against the flow, you end up on your backside, and it's never a good thing. And I can just imagine Jesus. He had just got off the boat, and straight away he gets flocked to. And you've got Jairus who's been approached by the leader of the synagogue, and he's got an intention of going to Jairus' daughter to see what he can do. Now, what I like about readings from Mark, often there's many stories sandwiched in the story. I like to think of it as like a gospel sandwich. You know, Jesus is going to do one story, going off to do one thing, but then another thing happens. And in this case, we have the unnamed woman reaching out to his cloak to try and have that faith of being healed. Now, this is a woman subject to bleeding for 12 years, and she had suffered a great deal, and she wasn't getting better. But if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately, with that faith, the bleeding stops. When I think about faith and clothes and touching clothes, it takes me back. I'm quite a fan of some of the old films. And one old film from 1953 is The Robe, which has Gene Simmons in it. And I've said, and it, to cut a long story short, the plot of it is there's this Roman tribune who was responsible for crucifying Jesus. And when the soldiers are at the foot of the cross gambling over his clothes, he wins Jesus' robes. Now this robe has a negative effect on him. He ends up having nightmares, seeing visions, and eventually his slave steals the robe and runs off and becomes a Christian. And lo and behold, this robe is performing miracles. People are being healed by its power. Eventually, the tribune goes to seek this robe because he believes it's cursed and tries to destroy it. But he ends up becoming a Christian. And he eventually finds his way back to Rome, where the Emperor Caligula gets hold of this robe and hears about this robe. And he tries to use this robe for his own personal use and finds nothing happens. And it just goes to show that with faith, you can do great things. With faith, that robe was able to heal people. And in a way, this woman reaching out to touch Jesus' clothes was healed. But Jesus sensed power had left him. And often when you do something, whether it's to do with ministry or whether it's going about your daily life, sometimes doing things for the people can take a piece of you. You give a bit of yourself to people. And in a way, that's what Jesus was doing. He was giving a bit of himself for that woman to be healed. Often, when there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world, like Jairus' daughter who was not well and close to death, this woman who had suffered, the reading from Wisdom gives us a good example about the nature of God. Jesus was in control of this. God has authority over illness and death. And like what the reading of Wisdom says, God does not make death. He does not delight in the death of the living. He created all things that they might exist. The generative forces of the world are wholesome, and there is no destructive poison in them. Corruption and evil entered the world, and that's what's responsible for so many of the things that happen today. Getting back to the reading and getting back to the sermon, Jesus, he had one thing in mind, and that was to go and heal Jairus' daughter. He got distracted, and quite rightly so. That I often relate to the disciples at this point when Jesus said, "Who touched my clothes?" I think they could have right to be, say, "Well, you're in a crowd, mate. Of course someone's going to touch you or jostle you." So, in that sort of sense, you get an idea that Jesus knew that power had gone from him. Jesus had that one intent, to go and heal Jairus' daughter, but he took the time as well to stop and address the woman who approached him. Out of fear, she said that, out of fear she came and trembling and told him the truth. And Jesus said, your faith has healed you. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. And at the time, this sort of hemorrhaging, this is where the religious institution of the time was so wrong, because she was considered impure and untouchable. And yet Jesus took the time to speak to her, allowed her to be healed. A mentor of mine, when I worked on my parents' mission in Zambia, he did a lot of hospital chaplaincy. And the one thing he told me was, the best thing you can do in any sort of situation in the hospital, or whether it's out in the public, whether you're doing public ministry or out in the open, go and sit next to the person who would probably make you feel the most uncomfortable. Go and sit with them, be with them, listen to them, and do what you can for them. Those on the margins, those who are oppressed, the homeless person. Last Christmas, I had a lot of looks outside Tesco. I'd gone to Tesco's thing, and I asked the homeless man sitting there, "Are you okay? Can I get you anything?" And he said, "You know what, I could actually murder a cigarette." So I went in, I bought him a cigarette, and I sat next to him while he had a cigarette, and we talked. And we had an amazing chat about everything. And I was in my dog collar as well. It was a Sunday, and I was still in my dog collar, and I sat with him, and we got strange looks. There was me in my mask, sat a couple of meters away from him, and he was sat there, and we were having a talk. And he said, this means the world to me, because no one actually sits with me and talks to me. Jesus took the time, and he healed. He rose Jairus' daughter from the dead. Jesus has authority over death and illness. In a moment like this, we can often think, when we're looking at the scripture, trying to relate it to ourselves, what is your need? What's your crisis? What is your fear? Take it to Jesus. Take it to him, whatever way works for you. He loves you, and he is on your side, and he is waiting. The unnamed woman approached Jesus. Though she was fearful, she still approached him, and he made her